You're listening to the AID Network.
Hello there, friend. Welcome back to part 4 in our 10-part series, Brickey's Guide to Breaking into Hollywood. Hey, I'm Brickey. This is my guide to breaking into Hollywood. I always dreamed of being in the entertainment industry. I now live in the Los Angeles area, which means I'm constantly meeting people that work for the studios. I kind of have my own little spot in the entertainment industry, being a full-time podcaster, now messing around with the YouTube. I enjoy creating content, but what I also enjoy is talking to people that figured out a way to break into industries. I love talking to them as peers, not being intimidated by them, not being fans, but literally as a peer to understand how they did what they did. That's not a very good sentence, but you understand what I'm saying, right? Like, you look at somebody who's accomplished and you always wonder, man, but how did they get there? And you'll get the showboat Hollywood answer sometimes, but if you really push and you know how to make a friendship, you can kind of get them back to that moment. But yes, when and how did you learn how to bet on yourself? Today's episode is a full one. It's episode 491 from November 28, 2016. It was recorded at DesignerCon, which will be happening this November here in Anaheim. This one is a lot. There is a lot going on this one. And remember, I did it in front of a live audience nonetheless. It's called Turn Your Art into Entertainment. It's a panel that I moderated at DesignerCon 2016 with John Tomko, who was the guy who produced Falling Down. I don't know if you know that Michael Douglas movie, but it's one of my favorites. Josh Rhimes, who is a producer of BoJack Horseman on Netflix, but now he works over at Lucasfilm, and Brian Michael Levant, who is a wild card. He did a lot of stuff, worked with the Monsters a lot, loved the Flintstones. I think maybe he directed one of the Flintstone movies. Brian is a wild card, and you'll hear that in this interview. And we had a unique relationship that I had fun with. This is how to break into Hollywood. And these guys are all players in the industry, right? These are the people that you want to meet. If you have an idea, you end up in one of their offices, you pitch to them, you hope that they see your vision, and then it's changing your life from there, changing your career from there. Today's episode is brought to you by my friends over at Jack Prince. They've helped change my career by funding the podcast for over 4 years. Go to jakprince.com/circle of trust where you'll save on already low industry prices. I'm telling you right now, whatever you're trying to make for you or your clients, don't forget, marking up printing is a great way to make extra income if you're a freelancer. By all means, do it with my friends over at Jack Prince. Anything you can think of printing, they're printing it right now, and they would love to print it for you. jakprince.com. These guys gave us a lot of insight, and I just went in with the straight, hard-hitting questions of how do we become people in the industry. And I asked a lot of questions about how do we that make content, being selfish for myself, how does a content creator break in? And they talk about the power of the fan base, how they look at metrics, how your social media numbers, they're not everything, but they do matter. They gave a lot of great advice for the working class creative like you and I on how we get from here to there. And these are dudes that are living it. They're taking the meetings. They're reading the treatments. They're reading the scripts every single day. This was a powerhouse of information. The entire episode, the interview was about an hour long. The episode ran a little bit longer than that with my monologue. You can unlock the entire episode by becoming a member of the Circle of Trust over at aidpodcast.com. I've put together a beautiful playlist with these 10 episodes, but these are 10 out of 800 where we've interviewed industry leaders in all different types of industry. These section of episodes, we're just focusing on the entertainment industry because I thought, why not? I got a lot of those interviews coming up. Might be a good time to show everybody where we've been so they know where we're going. Sign up today at aidpodcast.com. This is episode 491, Turn your art into entertainment, live from Designer Con. When you start out a film, film's very visual right out of the gate. And there's obviously, the artistic stuff, but then there's those shots of LA overhead, the cars moving on the highway, the palms lit by fog. Is that the type of things is that your influence there? Are you setting up that visual?
I would like to say that, I mean, that was early on a conversation that Tom and I were having about the film, because I feel like, sometimes the best things that can happen with a film, and especially, is place, and how place can become a character. And especially if you're dealing with a Los Angeles that a lot of people are not very, familiar with, which is the upper echelon of the socioeconomic, sphere of Los Angeles. And so I felt sometimes is that, there is this kind of notion, or this kind of idea about Los Angeles as being this sort of gloss and high finished idea, but then there's also these other aspects of LA that most people don't really see, and it's nice to sort of see, I feel like, especially from those shots above, it's almost as if how removed we can be from one another. We're so many of us are moving in the city in a very in a very similar way, but the lack of connection is not there, and it serves as kind of a setup for who Susan Morrow is, right? Somewhat very much removed from not only her idea of herself, but also who the rest of the world is, especially Los Angeles, or outside the world. And then I think what's nice about those shots about the palm trees is that we have this romanticized notion about the palm trees, right? It's the sunny, and so it's nice to have this counter image to that. And it also feels like these are building blocks as a setup for what is happening with the, I guess I would say with Susan's character, it's this kind of crisis. Yeah. It's really a crisis.
And I love that in today's world that the world has become graphic enough, design and graphic arts and visual communication is just with the invention of iOS products. It's around us all the time. I love that films now take the time to show those shots, just to sort of work your mind on where you're at and where you're going. And, some might say that they're gratuitous, but I find them to be very important, like postcards of this is where we're going and the story that we're telling. And they're always so artistic. They like I will forever be in love with shots of LA from above, because when you're on those roads and you're just trying to get home, like I was last night, you forget how beautiful it probably is from above. And the train station lit up in the middle of it all there. It's fantastic. I love how graphic that is.
It is. And I think that's to the point. I mean, you do lose, there is a certain beauty to Los Angeles that we sort of don't see in the way that we're moving through it in a regular way.
When you're one of the ants.
Exactly. Yeah. Exactly, when you're one of the ants. But I love that you picked that up, because, a lot of people are, a lot of the conversations that I've been having about Nocturnal Animals is the opening sequence. But that, too, is a setup for what I think is, a lot of the, why, as you said earlier, it's working on so many different levels. And I think that it's you can sort of, there's so many layers, and you can sort of with multiple viewings, you can see how certain things they're not gratuitous. There are actually reasons why those things are there, that they are not necessarily foreshadowing, but they're actually sort of helping to support a lot of these ideas and themes that are going through the film.
Well, let's talk about the opening shot, because I'm always curious about this. When there's a film where one of the characters is an artist, and we have that going on here, how do you create and curate a fictional body of work? Because, we go through an art gallery, we go through some different moments of design. Do you pick real artists and use their work in those spots, or do you fictionally make what this, it's kind of levels when you're here's the character, and then this is what the character's artwork looks like. At any point, do you use something that's real, or all of that?
That was a mandate for Tom, that the artwork had to be real.
Okay.
The only artwork that is not real is the opening sequence, the work that's in the very beginning of the film. And that I could say, there's so many artists who are informing what that should what that wanted to look like, that's fascinating because that's part of the conversation between Tom and I, and and it's it definitely is him in terms of deciding what that eventually is, but I like the ideas that we were just bringing ideas of what that could be.
Yeah.
And I think that's one of my important roles as a production designer is to sort of just be helping like just bring images, bring ideas about what these things can look like, and ultimately Tom is deciding what those things are, but that's a fun part of the process.
So when you read the script,
yeah,
and you give your initial pitch on what it's going to look like, what tools do you use at that moment? Do you sit down and sketch out things? Do you go through the world through Google image search and sort of make some swatches?
I do these elaborate mood boards, and my general process is that I really, because I started my personal history is I started studying film in an analytical way when I was 14 years old. I went to this great high school in Los Angeles, and we studied film with like the European masters like Godard and Rene and Bertolucci, and so I got exposed to that. So the way in which I start the process is I always think about what other tonally what this script feels like, right? And then I pull those references as a starting point, and then what happens is after that, then I start pulling photographic references that support like ideas about how we could actually show color. It doesn't necessarily mean that it has to end up looking like that, but it's actually just a point of reference. Like if we want to sort of just highlight a certain color, like say a red box, this is a way in which we can frame it, where we could have complementary or contrasting colors behind it, and we can really focus on it or not. And then, so through those boards, that's how we start the conversation. And then also through that is that we start talking about space and sort of like how, space can actually dictate and also represent a certain person's psychological space. Like for me, when I read the script, the film that came to mind was Michelangelo Antonioni's The Red Desert.
I'll have to take your word for that.
And so what I did was, she felt like Monica Vitti in that film. And so, and he knew that reference. So it's great to like be working with a filmmaker who actually understands the way that you're sort of seeing the tone of a film. And then we started talking about that film specifically about like how Antonioni is dealing with isolation and alienation from the world, and then how he actually frames Monica Vitti. So it's like frames within frames. And so you could see with Nocturnal Animals like how Amy Adams, Susan Morrow, is in her home, in her work environment, how she is being sort of captured in a lot of ways.
Right.
And so that was a way in which we could sort of start. So you start with a film reference, and then you move towards something that can actually work towards creating a theme. And so that's how we did.
You use the mood boards to create the conversation.
Right.
So everybody's kind of on the same page.
Exactly.
Like, that's our intensity of red, and that's the lighting and how we want it to look.
Exactly.
Once the wheels get rolling,
right,
and we're filming, how do your tools change? Like once things are really happening and new things pop up, what sort of tools are you using on set to keep the conversation going as it's developing?
Well, I think your hat changes. I mean, you're talking about like what I was the process in the beginning is very conceptual.
Right.
And it's really about sort of cultivating the ideas. And then what happens is that, then you switch towards a practical approach, right? You have to manage an art department, as we started earlier in the conversation, you have to disseminate these ideas to your set decoration department, your property department, and your art department proper about how you can best articulate these ideas. And then what happens is like while we're shooting, it's a having the boards fully articulated is always like this kind of Bible, so people can always refer back to it,
right,
and see, okay, yes, we're trying to actually promote this color in this environment, or we're trying to actually have this kind of reference, right? And so because like I go back a little bit to like Susan's character, her being a gallerist was really important because we curated a lot of the art to have a little bit of meaning. So there's reasons why that artwork is in that space. It's not just arbitrary. So that's so you remind your team like why we're shooting that particular piece of art in this environment, and so you also are looking for spaces that could best articulate that idea.
Yeah.
So those are the things you're like working with practically, and then what things come up are just logistical ones, like how long you can dress a set, how long you have to wrap out of a set, or we lose a set and we have to find another location, and you're trying to find something that looks very similar, but sometimes it doesn't work out and you have to move away from that idea.
The thing that frustrates me about film and TV is that the beautiful modern home that we see all the time, where all the furniture is awesome, the artwork is pristine, it's this promise of how great life could be. But I don't live that way. Mm-mm. And I only know one person who does. And I look at that vision of perfection, and I go home and I'm like, this place is a hellhole, and it's nice to visit there, but there's always sort of that re-entry of walking back into my house and being like, why can't I not, it's almost like a feeling of failure that I can't get on the other side of the screen, and live in that glass box house with the metal fence around it, So is part of that playing house, what could it be like to have all the best things? Do you live that way?
It depends on who you ask. If you ask my wife, she'll probably be like, geez, he's a pain in the ass to live with. But I don't, that's such a hard question to answer because I'm always like, I don't really fall back on that question, because it's more like you're always trying to serve the film and trying to come up with ideas like what is the best environment to best express another area or aspect of that character. And sometimes it is like overly done and it's too perfection, as you said, or like too organized and split. But in the case of like Susan, to default to her is that she is a blue chip gallerist. When I was talking with Tom very early, it just felt like, what we wanted to do with her space is that it would be like minimalist, but exquisitely curated, because she is a person who would be very specific about what is in that environment. So it had to be what you were sort of like talking about, like what it shouldn't, what it's difficult to be. So it was that she is a much easier, not easier, but it's easier to identify who that is, right?
Yeah.
And the difficulty was just making sure that those objects that we put in that space are the right ones, that pleased the environment and also Tom. The other characters, like say when we go back to the West Texas, there's a looseness to that a little bit more, because you're dealing with different characters and their different socioeconomics, right? Ray, Aaron Taylor Johnson's character is very different than Susan's character, and very different than Tony's character, and so you can speak to that in some way.
Yeah, I just always find it interesting that you see so much of that perfection in Hollywood, whether it's the big screen or the small one, and it's always like, man, am I ever going to get there? Because that's what I'm seeking in life, and it's always like wow, it would be like I can drive home and just think about like, man, that guy made a really great cup of iced coffee, and his glass was like, I pay attention to all those things. It's almost like I'm going through the movie like I'm shopping.
Right.
How can I not get there? Like I remember in Fight Club when they do that beautiful graphic design scene where he walks into the room and all the IKEA furniture fills up the room. And I remember leaving that film being like, I got to get my game going on at home. I got to get back in the game.
You got to get your layers of IKEA going.
Yeah, absolutely, absolutely. So when you are you hold the visual keys for the film, and you've got people that you got to please. What are some of your strategies to sort of get your way? You want to win the fight. You got a vision. You're hired because you're the guy that can see what it should look like. What are some of the tools that you use to sort of convince people, like, trust me, man, this is the shade of red?
Well, this is, that's why the mood boards are so successful. Mm-hmm. And I also, because I think you can, it's very easy for everybody to see your ideas about how the film should look. So the way it happens for me is that I do initial level of mood boards, and then as we start finding locations, then it expands out. And so I also put them in sequential order in terms of how the script is laid out, so that you could see how things are working off of each other. So it's easy for like producers or a DP or a costume designer to see how things are working, and how they know and they have a good idea about as Ariane would know, like how she should interpret how her character, the costume should be for those particular characters in that environment, or Seamus can see like how he should think about lighting it and whatnot. So we're all then working in concert. And then I think the mood boards as like a continuous thread for everybody.
Sure.
And then I think what happens is, in terms of a style, a leadership style, I feel like, I have to impart to my team that they're very much an agent in this notion of what Nocturnal Animals or whatever film we're doing is. Like I think it's important to sort of be open to their ideas about what something could and should look like, because if they're involved in being part of the creative process, I get the best out of people. So it's like I do have specific ideas about how something should look, but like when I go in and see after a set decorator is dressed to set, it's important for me to sort of, because sometimes it's not always how I had imagined it, but to see always the creativity that is there, to acknowledge it, and then to say, hey, this is fantastic. I was kind of thinking about it a little differently. Maybe if we move this a little bit over here, then I think that we're almost there. And so I think what that does is that it really encourages the person who's working with me to really strive constantly to do their best. But then we're also collaborating.
Right.
It's the same way as my relationship with Tom. Like when Tom or any director, when they come to the set, it may be different how they imagine it was going to end up, even though we do elaborate like director boards, like basically like what the furniture layouts, etc. But when they come, it's like, oh, maybe I want this chair to be closer to the window because I want to stage them there. So you have to be a little bit open all the time about how something will eventually be shot.
Do you ever feel stuck in the middle? Because you've got so many creative people that answer to you, and then you go over to the big player, the director and the cinematographers and stuff. I remember when, I was running my boutique design agency. Yeah. I would go talk to the clients.
Yep.
I would massage that deal. I'd come back, give what was agreed upon to my team, and sometimes my team would just shit all over it. And I'd be like, guys, like, I came in the door excited. Now you're kind of being babies, because we know artistic types. We can be a little finicky at times. And so I'd kind of go sit over at my desk. I'm like, what am I doing here? Like I'm kind of stuck in the middle.
Well, you have to be a cheerlooter, don't you think? I mean, I think that's what we're asked to do is, and not, I'm not poo-pooing that in any way. I think that, I think to be a very like evolved creative person is you have to be able to think about how and communicate as effectively as possible, right? And I think, and then we have to say like, okay, well, even though it's not like 100% on what we thought it would be, and it's down to like 70 or 60%, we're going to make that 60% the best it could actually be, right?
That's a good idea.
And I think that we're going to try and still try and elevate meaning as best we can with what we're given, because that is what we're, filmmaking is so much about compromise. It is. It's like, I come to Tom with these ideas. He probably sort of agrees with maybe like 60% of that, and then I have to move away very quickly from that 40%, because if I wallow in that 40%, then I'm no good to him.
Right.
Right. I really need to sort of be ready to just sort of pivot constantly, but in a good way, because it challenges me. I mean, I'm challenging him and he's challenging me, and I think when you do that, you are getting, you're getting the best out of people.
And that's what I think about when I watch a film is there's so many people that work on one.
God,
it's
incredible.
Like, how does it even get done? And, let me ask you this. How long in the process does it take for you to think of Tom Ford as Tom? Because it's two different people.
Oh, it is. And I think
Tom Ford is like the man. Tom's the guy that you're working with, digging the ditch with. How long did it take for you to transition into being around Tom?
Oh, from the very beginning.
Yeah.
I think that's why I think we hit it off. I mean, I got a call. I got a call to sort of come and meet with him. My agents had no idea. Tom wasn't like, giving out what the script was about or anything. They said Tom Ford would like to meet with you, and I was like, of course, I'm gonna go meet with Tom Ford, right? I'm gonna see what that's like.
Were you stressed out about what to wear?
I wasn't, because I feel like, I feel the best me is the one who's coming like who I am and being ready to just like, it's like sitting across from you. Like the best thing for me is to just be who I am and just sort of say like, hey, we're having a conversation, right?
Yeah.
That's like the best thing.
But I have a friend, right? And he's way into fashion.
Yeah.
And when I go to hang out with him, I feel like I'm getting dressed up for a date.
Are you?
Because I've hung out with him before and he's like looked at my pants when I don't have my best jeans on. And I'm like, oh, I just got judged.
Oh, I'm sure that's happening. I'm sure that's happening.
You're just not going to let yourself be aware of it?
I'm not going to let that sort of like, stop me.
Yeah.
An impediment for me like interacting with Tom. I mean,
so you didn't run over to Amazon and prime in a bunch of stuff?
I think it's always best to just be who you are, and I think that's why he responded to me, because I feel like I think that he's like, we just had in our first interview with him, we just sat and talked. It was like just about our personal lives, about living in Los Angeles.
See if you would click.
Exactly.
Yeah.
And I think that that's how he operates. He wants to work with someone who he can trust.
Mm-hmm.
And even though we're not going to agree all the time, I mean, that's just the nature of life,
Collaboration.
It's like, it just happens that way. I think he wanted to feel as if he was going to be working with someone who's just is going to be, 100% passionate about the project, who is not afraid to present ideas and who's going to implement it as best he can.
I think he probably, on some level, enjoyed that you saw him as Tom.
Oh, for sure.
Because you got to get that out the window if you're going to make good art together.
Absolutely.
You're soldiers when you're on that set.
Oh, I mean, it's totally different. I mean, I know that Tom has a totally different way of being when he's Tom Ford, the fashion designer. But I think, the one thing that I really want to communicate with people is that Tom Ford is a filmmaker, and he's a damn good filmmaker, and it's really like nice to see that he actually is inspiring how talented he is.
So when I'm watching the film, right, total honesty, I'm like, Tom Ford, this is a rich guy getting into another project. It's a vanity project. Not at all.
Not at all.
Not at all. He's a filmmaker. He's got it in him. He's obviously a guy that can do more than one thing and do them all well. Like, it is a very, very well-made film. Let's talk about something that people have seen, because we've just, drove them nuts for the last half hour. Straight Outta Compton.
Yeah.
Fantastic film. You're working with a really, really rich piece of pop culture.
Yep.
People are very passionate about NWA. Was there ever stress of being a white guy and working on such an important moment in black culture?
That's a really good question. I think, it's a dilemma, because I think that, there was, I'll try to navigate as best I can through my experience.
It's a complex issue.
It's a complex issue, and I think that, you've got a lot of different factors playing in. I think, Dre and Cube and Eazy's widow, Tamika, were executive producers on the project.
So you work directly with them?
I work with them, and I think that it was really important to them to actually make sure that they had a very diverse crew.
Mm-hmm.
And I think there were definitely efforts made to try and make the crew as diverse as possible. And I think what the dilemma is that it's always sometimes that was out there, which I think is really important.
Yeah.
And it's also important because, as many people saw with how Straight Outta Compton was treated during the award season, is that we need more films that are dealing with the African American community, or actually any minority community needs to have more of those stories put up there at the higher level. So I think that's number one, and I think they're very aware of that. I think that sometimes it's always about timing. It's like some who's available to work and who's not available to work. My timing came in, it was out of luck. I mean, they had another designer on, but then the film hadn't been greenlit, and so he left, and then I came in, and so I'm sure there was a conversation about, who we have as head of departments, but I think what's really important, what I really liked about my experience is that, the people who were in the highest position of power were African Americans, and I think that was the most important aspect of it, and they were actually delegating and dictating what that film was, and I think that was was really important.
Kept the seal of approval that it was legit.
I think it is, and I think it was a question that came out, and I think it's a constant. It should be a constant question, not just because it's a film that is dealing with African Americans. I think it's that we should be having that conversation all the time.
Right.
We should be having that, not just about African Americans or minorities. It should be also about women in positions of power as well. So I think that like it's good. It should we should have been having that conversation about with Nocturnal Animals, or Beginners. But sometimes we don't think about that thing, and that's what we need to really be focusing on.
Hey friends, thank you so much for listening to part 4 in our 10-part series, Brickey's Guide to Breaking into Hollywood. This one, the little 25-minute sample you heard, which is like less than half of the entire interview, lot of great intel in there. And it is my honor to do that. And I'm able to do that because people believe in this type of entertainment. I've been doing this sort of podcast longer than anyone, more episodes than anyone. I am committed to my audience, and my audience is committed to me. By going to aidpodcast.com, you can hear the full version of this episode and all 800s, as well as the full version that we put out every day. Show will be back Tuesday after Labor Day, but until then, you can dive through the archives by becoming a member at aidpodcast.com. Hope you enjoyed this one. I did. Good day, good design, and I will see you back here for tomorrow for part 5.